The air inside the crowded airport thrummed with the restless energy of traveler shields, clicking against polished floors, voices overlapping in a symphony of urgency and exhaustion. Amid this whirlwind of motion, Amara Johnson sat poised in the sleek, modern lounge, her silver suitcase resting like a silent sentinel at her feet. She exuded an unshakable calm, her dark eyes tracing the paths of strangers as they hurried past, their lives briefly intersecting with hers. Inside that unassuming case lay not just personal belongings, but a treasure of immense significance. The Presidential Medal of Freedom, bestowed upon her mere hours earlier in a ceremony that still echoed in her mind. The weight of the honor pressed against her chest, a blend of pride and responsibility she carried as she awaited her flight to Washington, D.C. Amara was no stranger to attention. Years of tireless advocacy for the marginalized had sharpened her awareness of how others perceived Hersom with admiration, others with skepticism. As she sat there, she caught the fleeting glances of passers-by. A young couple whispered her name, their faces lighting up with recognition, while an older man in a rumpled suit squinted at her suitcase, his brow furrowing as if it held some dark secret. She brushed it off with practiced ease, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the case. To her, it was a shield, a tangible reminder of her journey. But to others, it seemed to stir curiosity or perhaps something more unsettling. When the boarding call crackled through the speakers, Amara rose with quiet determination, her movements fluid yet purposeful. She navigated the bustling gate with the grace of someone who had faced far greater challenges. Then a crowded terminal, settling into her first-class seat, a small gesture of recognition. From the airline she had tucked the silver suitcase beneath her chair, its presence a steady comfort as she fastened her seatbelt. The cabin hummed with the low buzz of pre-flight chatter, passengers stowing bags and exchanging tired smiles. Amara opened a book on her lap, but her mind drifted elsewhere, replaying the applause of the ceremony, the firm handshake of the president, and the faint undercurrent of doubt she'd sensed in the room despite the praise. A flight attendant approached, her uniform crisp and her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. "Can I get you something to drink, ma'am?" she asked, her voice polite but clipped, as if she were reciting lines from a script. Sarah Dixon, her name tag read. Amara met her gaze and offered a warm, "Water would be great, thank you." Sarah nodded and turned away, but not before her eyes darted to the suitcase for a split second to flicker. So brief Amara might have missed it if she hadn't spent a lifetime reading such subtleties. She said nothing, her expression unchanged. But the moment lodged itself in her thoughts like a splinter. As the plane roared into the sky, Amara tried to settle into the rhythm of the flight. The hum of the engines vibrated through her seat, and the clouds outside the window stretched endlessly, a canvas of white and gray. Yet her unease grew, a quiet ripple beneath her calm exterior. Across the aisle, Sarah murmured to a colleague, their heads bent close together. Amara couldn't hear the words, but the quick, furtive glances toward her suitcase told her enough. She shifted slightly, her fingers tightening around the book she wasn't reading. She knew this feeling, the weight of suspicion, the silent judgment that painted her not as a person, but as a question mark. It was a sensation she'd carried since childhood, honed by years of navigating a world quick to assume the worst. By the second hour, Sarah's demeanor had shifted. The polite mask she'd worn earlier had slipped, replaced by a taut weariness that sharpened her features. She passed Amara's seat more often than necessary, her steps deliberate, her eyes lingering on the suitcase with a scrutiny that bordered on accusation. Amara's instincts flared. She'd faced this before in street corners, in boardrooms, in quiet moments when her very existence seemed to unsettle others. But this was different. The tension wasn't just personal. It was swelling, spreading like a storm gathering strength. In the cockpit, Sarah stood before the captain, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't want to overreact," she said, her voice low and measured, though a faint tremor betrayed her nerves. "But the passenger in 3 Ashes got this suitcase, and she's acting off. I can't explain it, but something feels wrong." The captain, a grizzled man with deep lines etched into his face, frowned as he leaned back in his seat. "Did you see anything specific? Anything concrete?" he asked, his tone gruff but cautious. Sarah hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Not exactly, it's just a feeling. But shouldn't we be careful? The captain sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. We'll watch her. But without evidence, we can't jump to conclusions. His words were firm. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted, and the air in the cockpit thickened with unspoken worry. Unaware of the drama unfolding behind closed doors, Amara gazed out the window, her thoughts a tangled weave of memory and resolve. She'd spent decades fighting for justice, dismantling the biases that clung to society like rust. Yet here she was, ensnared in a moment that mirrored the very struggles she'd sought to erase. The irony wasn't lost on her, and it fueled a quiet fire in her chest, a determination to rise above whatever lay ahead. As the flight wore on, the atmosphere grew heavy. Sarah's movements became sharp and hurried, her eyes avoiding Amara's entirely. Passengers nearby began to notice, their heads turning subtly, their whispers carrying fragments of speculation. "What's going on up there?" a businessman muttered to his seatmate. His tie loosened and his brow creased. "Maybe it's her bag," the woman beside him replied, her voice hushed but eager. Amara felt their stares like pinpricks, but she kept her composure, her hands resting lightly on her lap. When the captain's voice announced the descent, a strange heaviness settled over Amara. It wasn't fear, for it was an old companion she'd long since mastered, but a premonition, a sense that something awaited her beyond the plane's doors. As the wheels kissed the tarmac, she noticed the crew's quickened pace, their glances sharper, more intentional. She gripped the handle of her suitcase, her fingertips brushing its smooth surface as if drawing strength from it. Whatever was coming, she would meet it head-on. The plane rolled to a stop, and Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom, bright but brittle. "We ask that passengers in rows 1 through 5 remain seated for a moment. The rest of the plane will deplane first. Thank you for your cooperation." Amara's brow furrowed. This wasn't standard procedure, not for a flight like this. She stayed in her seat, watching as the other passengers shuffled out, their curiosity palpable. A teenage girl craned her neck to look back, whispering to her mother, "Do you think it's her?" The mother shushed her, but her own eyes flicked toward Amara, then the suitcase. When the cabin emptied, 2 uniformed officers stepped aboard, their boots thudding softly against the carpeted aisle. They were Youngin with a buzz cut and a stern jaw, the other with a softer face but a rigid posture. Their gazes locked onto Amara immediately, and Sarah hurried to their side, her voice a hushed murmur as she gestured toward the silver case. Amara straightened, her hands resting lightly on the suitcase. She didn't need to ask what was happening. She'd seen this script play out before, a prejudice cloaked in procedure, suspicion masquerading as caution. "Ma'am," the officer with the buzz cut said, his tone clipped but not harsh. "We need you to come with us for a moment. Please bring your belongings." Amara met his eyes, her pulse quickening though her voice remained steady. "What's this about?" she asked. "Just a few questions," he replied, his words vague but firm. "Routine matter," she nodded, unbuckling her seatbelt and lifting the suitcase with deliberate care. As she walked down the aisle, she felt Sarah's stare boring into her back. Glancing over her shoulder, she caught the flight attendant standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at her lips, a look of quiet victory that made Amara's stomach twist. Inside the terminal, the officers led her to a small, windowless room, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the gray walls. They gestured to a metal chair, their faces unreadable. "Would you mind opening your suitcase for us?" the softer-faced officer asked, his voice almost apologetic. Amara paused, her fingers hovering over the latches. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she clicked them open and lifted the lid. There, cradled in a velvet-lined case, gleamed the Presidential Medal of Freedom, its gold surface catching the harsh light. Beside it lay a stack of documents, letters of commendation, a speech she'd written for the ceremony, and a few personal items, a worn photo of her late mother, a small notebook filled with her dreams and doubts. The room fell silent, the air thick with the officers' sudden discomfort. Their eyes darted between the medal and Amara, their certainty unraveling. "What exactly were you looking for?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with a quiet fury that cut through the stillness. The stern-jawed officer cleared his throat, his gaze dropping to the floor. "We got a report from the crew about potential suspicious behavior. We had to check." Suspicious behavior, Amara echoed, her tone rising slightly, each word a blade. What was suspicious? Me sitting in my seat, carrying a suitcase with an award I earned through decades of fighting for people like you to see. Me as human? The officers shifted, their silence deafening. The softer-faced one picked up the metal certificate, scanning it briefly before setting it down with a faint thud. Amara snapped the suitcase shut, the sound sharp in the tense air. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said, her voice unwavering. "Ma'am, we understand this might feel," the stern officer began, but she cut him off, her eyes blazing. "No, you don't understand. You acted on a hunch, on a whisper, because someone saw me and decided I didn't belong. This isn't just about me, it's about every person who's ever been judged, before they've even had a chance to speak." The encounter left a mar not just on Amara, but on the officers, on Sarah, on the passengers who'd whispered in the aisles. It was a stark reminder of justice's fragility, of how power, when wielded carelessly, could tarnish even the brightest moments. For Amara, it was fuel. She walked out of that room not diminished, but emboldened. Her suitcase a symbol not just of her triumph, but of the fight still ahead, a fight for a world where no one's worth was questioned by the weight of their skin or the contents of their dreams. The plane rolled to a stop at the gate, its wheels scraping the asphalt with a faint, weary groan. Inside the cabin, Amara Johnson sat motionless, her fingers curled tightly around the handle of her silver suitcase. She could still feel the weight of the officer's presence from earlier, their calm, clipped voices doing little to soften the sting of their actions. To them, it might have been routine, just another passenger to question, but to Amara, it was a glaring spotlight on a truth she'd known her whole life. Suspicion clung to her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. The air in the plane felt thick now, heavy with the unspoken tension radiating from the remaining crew members who avoided her gaze. Outside, the jet bridge stretched toward the terminal like an accusing finger, and Amara braced herself for what lay ahead. Over the intercom, a voice cut through the hum of the Cabinsera Dixon, the flight attendant, her tone polished but brittle. "Passengers in rows 1 through 5, please remain seated for just a moment. Thank you for your patience." Amara's brow creased slightly, a flicker of unease stirring in her chest. It was an odd request for a flight like this, domestic, uneventful, no delays to speak of. She glanced around, catching the curious stares of passengers in the back rows as they shuffled toward the exit. Their eyes darted toward her, lingering just long enough to spark whispers. "Why aren't they letting us all off?" a man grumbled to his wife, his voice low but sharp. The woman leaned closer, her reply barely audible. "I think it's her." She nodded toward Amara, her gaze a mix of pity and intrigue. As the last of the rear passengers disappeared through the door, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the aisle. Their movements were deliberate, boots tapping softly against the carpeted floor as their eyes swept the cabin. Before settling on her, Amara's pulse quickened, though her face remained steady. Behind the officers, Sarah hovered near the galley, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was a tangled mess of smugness and nerves, like someone who'd just rolled the dice and wasn't sure if she'd won. One officer cleared his throat, his voice firm but not unkind. "Miss Johnson, we need you to come with us. Please bring your belongings." Amara exhaled slowly, rising from her seat with a grace that belied the storm brewing inside her. She lifted the suitcase, its cool metal surface grounding her as she met Sarah's stare. The flight attendant didn't flinch, but the faint nod she exchanged with a nearby crew member spoke volumes, an unspoken agreement that whatever was happening, they believed it was justified. The walk down the jet bridge felt endless, flanked by the officers. Amara noticed the sit-along glances from airport workersmen in neon vests pausing mid-task, their curiosity piqued by the sight of her escorted like some kind of threat. The officers led her to a small, stark room just off the bustling concourse. It was a cold, utilitarian space, a scratched metal table, two mismatched chairs, and a single window offering a view of nothing but gray concrete. "Please, have a seat," one officer said, gesturing to a chair. Amara set the suitcase on the table with a soft thud and sat, her posture rigid but composed. "Can someone tell me what this is about?" she asked, her voice calm yet edged with a quiet demand for answers. The officer hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "We got a report about your behavior on the flight. We're just following up to make sure everything's in order." Amara tilted her head, her eyes sharpening. "My behavior," she repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "What exactly was reported?" The officer looked away, his discomfort palpable as he fumbled for a response. "The crew had concerns about your luggage. They thought it might contain something suspicious." Amara's lips pressed into a thin line, a spark of incredulity flashing in her chest. "Suspicious?" she echoed, her tone dry. "Well, let's clear that up." With a deft click, she opened the suitcase and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled against a velvet lining, gleamed the Presidential Medal of Freedom, its intricate design catching the dim fluorescent light. Beside it rested a crisp certificate, the official seal unmistakable, and a neatly folded stack of clothes. The room went still. The second officer, younger and less seasoned, reached for the certificate with a cautious hand, as if it might burn him. He scanned the text, his face shifting from confusion to a dawning realization that bordered on shame. "This is the Presidential Medal of Freedom," Amara said, her voice steady as steel. "Awarded to me this morning by the President of the United States. Is this what you found suspicious?" The officers exchanged a glance, their unease thickening the silence. "Miss Johnson." "We didn't know," the older one started, but Amara cut him off, her tone icy. "No, you didn't care to know. You acted on someone's baseless hunch, and now we're here wasting my time and yours." Before they could respond, the door swung open and a supervisor stepped in. She was a woman in her mid-40s, her face lined with the weariness of too many long shifts and the faint worry of someone who knew a mess when she saw one. "Miss Johnson," she began, her voice practiced but tinged with regret. "I'm so sorry for this inconvenience. The crew thought they were acting in the interest of safety, but it seems there was a misunderstanding." Amara snapped the suitcase shut and stood, her presence filling the room. "A misunderstanding?" she said, her words sharp enough to cut. "That's what you call this? A misunderstanding doesn't involve police waiting for me at the gate." The supervisor faltered, her hands clasping nervously in front of her. "You're right," she conceded, nodding faintly. "This shouldn't have happened. I'll ensure the incident is reviewed, and the crew understands the implications of their actions." Amara's eyes narrowed, her anger simmering just beneath her calm exterior. "You'll review it. That's not enough. This isn't just about me, it's about what this says to every person of color, every individual who doesn't match someone's narrow idea of safe. I'm not letting this go." She slung the suitcase over her shoulder, the motion deliberate and defiant, and turned to leave. The officers stepped aside, their faces a mix of regret and awkwardness as she strode past. Emerging into the terminal, Amara caught sight of Sarah Dixon lingering near a row of seats, her arms still crossed, her posture stiff. Their eyes locked for a fleeting moment, and Amara saw something new in Sarah's gaze, a flicker of doubt, a crack in the certainty she'd worn so confidently before. But Amara didn't pause. She walked on, her steps echoing with purpose, her focus unyielding. By the time she reached her hotel that evening, the incident had begun to spread like wildfire. Passengers from the flight had taken to social media, their posts raw and unfiltered. One tweet burned into her mind, watching Amara Johnson, fresh off receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, get treated like a suspect was sickening. Flying while black. Another shared a shaky photo of her flanked by the officers, captioned, "This is racial profiling in action." Shame on her eyes and airlines. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Amara scrolled through the messages pouring in, friends offering outrage, colleagues pledging support, strangers sharing their own stories of injustice. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Harrison Brooks, Horizon Airlines coup. It was curt, polished, and maddeningly vague, an acknowledgement of the incident and a promise to look into it. She read it twice, her frustration boiling over. It was the kind of response meant to soothe without committing the flimsy bandage on a gaping wound. She grabbed her phone and dialed Lisa Caldwell, her attorney, the line barely ringing before Lisa picked up. "They're trying to sweep this under the rug," Amara said, her voice tight with resolve. "Not surprising," Lisa replied, her tone steady and pragmatic. "But they won't get away with it for long. We need to act fast, document every detail, shape the story before they can spin it. Amara nodded to herself, her determination solidifying. This isn't just about me, Lisa. If they think they can do this and walk away, they'll keep doing it to others. I won't let that happen. Lisa's voice hardened with agreement. Then we make sure they don't. This is bigger than one flight, Amara. It's about forcing them to reckon with how they treat people. Hanging up, Amara leaned back, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her humiliation. In front of dozens of passengers, the cold indifference of the officers, the supervisor's hollow apologies, but beneath it all burned a fire she'd carried her whole life, stoked by every injustice she'd faced and fought. The silver suitcase sat beside her, a silent testament to her worth, her struggle, and the battle she was about to wage. This wasn't the end, it was the spark of something much larger, a fight that would ripple far beyond the airport's walls. Back at the terminal, Sarah Dixon lingered near the window, watching Amara's figure disappear into the crowd. Her arms were still crossed, but her grip tightened, her nails digging into her sleeves. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty crept into her thoughts. She'd been so convinced that her instincts, honed by years of training and vigilance, had flagged a real threat. She'd felt a quiet pride when she'd alerted the crew, a sense of duty fulfilled. But now, as she replayed the scene in her mind, Amara's unwavering dignity, the glint of that metal, the weight of her words, Sarah's certainty crumbled. Had she misjudged? Had her snap decision, born of a fleeting glance and an unshakable bias, set off a chain of events she couldn't undo? She turned away from the window, her expression unreadable, but inside, a gnawing doubt took root. For Amara, the stakes were clear. This wasn't just about a single moment of indignity, it was about the deeper lesson of justice, the cost of unchecked power, and the consequences of letting fear dictate who gets to feel safe. She knew the road ahead would be grueling, pitted with resistance from an airline desperate to save face and a system reluctant to change. But as she sat there, the hum of the city filtering through her hotel window, she felt a quiet strength settle over her. This was her fight now, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been diminished by the same careless assumptions. And she wouldn't back down until the world felt the weight of that truth. On a crisp morning following a harrowing incident at the airport, Amara Johnson found herself seated in the sanctuary of her office, a space that had always felt like a fortress of her achievements. Before her, resting on the polished surface of her desk, sat a silver suitcase, unassuming at first glance, yet now heavy with meaning. Its metallic sheen caught the sunlight streaming through the window, casting faint reflections across the room. Just a day ago, this suitcase had been a simple vessel for her personal belongings, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, a testament to a lifetime of breaking barriers. Now, it stood as the epicenter of a storm that threatened to engulf not just her, but the very principles she'd fought for. Her fingers brushed its cold surface, and a quiet fury simmered within her. Could something so ordinary be twisted into a symbol of suspicion? The door swung open with a familiar burst of energy, and Lisa Caldwell strode in, her attorney and confidant. Lisa's sharp eyes flicked to the suitcase as she tucked her leather briefcase under her arm, her movements brisk yet deliberate. She pulled out a chair with a scrape against the hardwood floor and sat, crossing her legs with an air of readiness. So she began, her voice laced with dry humor. That's the notorious troublemaker. Huh? Amara's lips twitched into a faint, resolute nod, though her gaze remained steely. Apparently so, she replied, her tone measured but edged with defiance. They didn't care about what I did or said. It was this suitcase that made me a threat in their eyes. Not my character, not my history, just the fact that I dared to carry it. Lisa flipped open her notebook, her pen poised like a weapon as Amara began to unravel the tangled threads of the previous day. Each detail spilled out with precision, the sidelong glances from the flight crew that prickled her skin, the hushed whispers that seemed to echo louder than the plane's engines, and the gut-wrenching moment when security escorted her off the flight, their hands firm and their faces impassive. She painted the scene vivid, lithe, sterile glow of the airport terminal, the murmur of confused passengers, the weight of humiliation pressing against her chest as she stood there, singled out for no reason she could fathom. Lisa scribbled furiously, her brow furrowing deeper with every word. When Amara finished, Lisa set her pen down and met her client's gaze with unwavering conviction. "This isn't a simple mix-up, Amara," she said, her voice low and resolute. "This is racial profiling, stark and undeniable. They'll try to downplay it, twist the story, and sweep it under the rug, but we're not going to let them bury this." Amara leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking under her weight as her jaw tightened. She could still feel the sting of being treated like a criminal, the indignity of having her life's work symbolized by that metal register to a source of suspicion. "They made me feel less than human," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and resolve. "All because of a suitcase that holds everything I've earned. If I don't fight this, I'm handing them permission to do it against someone else who doesn't deserve it." Lisa's eyes gleamed with fierce agreement. "Exactly. They'll push back hard, call it a misunderstanding, lean on their so-called protocols, and pray it fades away. But we're going to make sure this sticks because it's bigger than a single flight." By the afternoon, the ripples of the incident had begun to spread far beyond the confines of Amara's world. Passengers from the flight took to their phones, their fingers flying across screens as they posted raw, unfiltered accounts of what they'd seen. One woman recalled the palpable tension that hung over the cabin, the way the flight attendant's eyes darted toward Amara with a mixture of unease and judgment. Another passenger, a young man with a shaky voice in his video, described the discomfort that churned in his stomach as he watched Amara being led away. Her head held high despite the injustice. A single post ignited the spark. "I can't believe I saw Amara Johnson, a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, treated like a suspect over a suitcase." "Justice for Amara," the words raced across the internet, gathering momentum with every share, every retweet, until they blazed like wildfire. The media latched onto the story with ravenous speed. By evening, cable news studios buzzed with heated debates, the air thick with outrage and defensiveness. Some commentators thundered against Horizon Airlines, their voices booming as they decried the incident as a glaring example of racial bias, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Others, perched behind gleaming desks, spun a different tale framing the crew's actions as prudent, a necessary precaution in an uncertain world. Horizon Airlines, caught in the crosshairs, issued a statement that landed like a damp squib. "At Horizon Airlines, the safety and well-being of our passengers are our top priorities. We regret any discomfort Ms. Johnson experienced and are conducting a thorough internal review." The words rang hollow to many, lacking the weight of accountability. Advocacy groups pounced, their press releases sharp with criticism, while social media erupted with hashtag #SindraCalifalafifili. Justice for Marriage won a digital rallying cry. Calls for boycotts swelled, and journalists sharpened their pens, digging into the airline's past with a fervor that promised no stone would be left unturned. Amid the chaos, Amara sat across from Rachel Marks in a brightly lit television studio, the silver suitcase a silent companion at her side. Rachel, a journalist renowned for her fearless pursuit of truth, leaned forward, her eyes locked on Amara's with a mixture of empathy and determination. The cameras hummed as Amara spoke, her voice steady yet resonant with quiet power. She recounted the flight in vivid strokest way the crew's stares had pierced her, the cold formality of the police officers who escorted her off, the sinking realization that this wasn't about what she'd done, but who she was. "I wasn't a threat because of my actions," she said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "I was a threat because of their assumptions about me. That's the reality for people of color every day in planes, in stores, on the streets. This is just one piece of a much larger puzzle." Rachel's brow creased as she pressed further. "Horizon Airlines says they're reviewing the incident. Do you think that's enough?" Amara shook her head, her expression unyielding. "A review is a start, but it's not justice. This isn't about one flight or one crew. It's about a culture that lets bias dictate who gets treated like a person and who gets treated like a problem. If we don't dismantle that culture, nothing changes." The interview struck a chord, clips ricocheting across the internet as viewers shared them with fervor. Amara's calm dignity, paired with her unflinching resolve, rallied a growing tide of support toward ordinary people, activists, and even strangers who saw their own struggles mirrored in hers. Meanwhile, at Horizon Airlines headquarters, tension crackled through a sleek boardroom where Harrison Brooks, the chief operating officer, sat at the head of a long table. The walls were plastered with charts, their jagged lines tracing the company's plummeting approval ratings and the rising chorus of boycott threats. An executive, his tie loosened and his voice tight with urgency, broke the silence. "We're losing the narrative here. We need a stronger statement, something to show we're not just sitting on our hands." Harrison's fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the table, his frown deepening. A stronger statement could backfire. He countered, his tone clipped. "It might look like we're admitting fault, and with a lawsuit looming, we can't risk that kind of exposure." Another voice piped up, tentative but calculating. "What about a private settlement? Offer her a payout, settle it quietly." Harrison's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Amara Johnson isn't chasing a check. She's fighting for principle. If we drag this out, it's only going to bury us deeper." The room fell silent, the weight of their predicament settling over them like a shroud. Harrison's phone buzzed, shattering the stillness with an alertant article detailing past allegations of racial bias against Horizon Airlines, each one a splinter in the company's crumbling facade. He skimmed it, his face darkening as the words sank in. "This isn't just about one flight anymore." He muttered, more to himself than the room. "We need a real plan, or we're done for." Outside those walls, the world was shifting, and Horizon was scrambling to keep up. Back in Lisa's law office, Amara stood by the window, her arms crossed as she watched the city hum below. The silver suitcase sat quietly in the corner, a steadfast witness to their unfolding battle. Lisa, surrounded by a flurry of papers and legal pads, adjusted her glasses and gestured to a whiteboard covered in bullet points testimonies. Leaked emails, patterns of discrimination stretching back years. "We've got something solid here, Amara," she said, her voice sharp with purpose. "This isn't just your story, it's a systemic failure, and we're going to rip it open." Amara turned, her expression a mix of weariness and steel. "They'll fight dirty. They'll twist it. Say I overreacted. Anything to dodge the real issue." Lisa nodded, unflinching. "They're already trying. Their latest memo claims it was all routine safety measures. But we've got witness suspects like Elena Ramirez who saw it differently." Elena, a soft-spoken woman with a keen eye, had felt the unease ripple through the plane that day. She'd watched the flight attendants huddle, their whispers sharp and secretive, their glances lingering on Amara with a suspicion that felt misplaced. It didn't sit right, Elena had told Lisa over the phone, her voice trembling with conviction. "When the police came, I knew it wasn't just procedure. Something was wrong." Her words, alongside others, painted a damning picture Lisa was determined to wield like a sword. Digging deeper, she'd uncovered troubling truths about Horizon's training, where vague directives to trust your gut often masked prejudice as instinct. "This isn't an isolated mistake," Lisa said, tapping a stack of files. "It's a system that lets bias hide behind policy. If we prove that, we can force real change." Amara's resolve hardened, her eyes glinting with purpose. "That's all I want. Justice isn't just for me, it's for everyone who's been made to feel small because of who they are." As the days stretched on, her fight swelled into a movement. Protests flared at airports nationwide, crowds clutching signs that demanded dignity in the skies and flying shouldn't mean profiling. At Washington National Airport, Amara stood on a makeshift stage, the silver suitcase at her feet like a battle-worn trophy. The air buzzed with the energy of supporters, their chants rising as she spoke. "This isn't just my fight," she said, her voice steady yet resonant, cutting through the noise. "It's about making sure every persona, no matter their skin, their story, can move through this world with respect. Together, we can stop this from happening again." The crowd roared, their voices a thunderous wave of solidarity. For the first time since that fateful flight, Amara felt a flicker of relief, a sense that the burden she carried wasn't hers alone. The road ahead loomed long and treacherous, fraught with resistance from those who had abused their power and hidden behind flimsy excuses. Yet, as she stood there, the lesson crystallized in her mind. Justice wasn't just a verdict or an apology, it was a reckoning, a dismantling of the systems that let power run unchecked. And the consequences of that abuse, she vowed, would echo far beyond Horizon Airlines, a warning to all who dared to wield authority without accountability. With Lisa at her side and a growing army behind her, Amara was ready to walk that road not just for herself, but for every soul who'd ever been diminished by the weight of another's prejudice. Amara Johnson sat in the dimly lit corner of her small apartment, her silver suitcase resting against the wall like a silent companion in her struggle. The faint glow of a street lamp filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room as she traced her fingers over the creased edges of a handwritten letter. Her eyes lingered on the shaky script of an elderly black man who had poured his heart onto the page, recounting decades of quiet terror every time he stepped onto a plane. "They look at us like we don't belong," he'd written, his words trembling with a pain she knew all too well. "What you're doing is for all of us. Don't give up." Her chest tightened as she read it again, the weight of his plea sinking deep into her bones. She folded the paper with deliberate care, tucking it into the suitcase alongside the metal keepsake. From that fateful flight, a tangible reminder of the moment. Her life had veered onto this relentless path. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was carrying the hopes of countless others who'd been dismissed, degraded, or deemed a threat for no reason beyond the color of their skin. Across town, Lisa Caldwell leaned back in her office chair, the faint hum of her laptop filling the silence as she reviewed the latest draft of their legal filing against Horizon Airlines. Her lips curved into a subtle, determined smile as she imagined the squirming discomfort of the airline's executives. This wasn't just another case, it was a reckoning. She'd known from the moment Amara walked into her office, shoulders squared and voice steady, that this fight would demand everything they had. Horizon's team of high-powered lawyers, with their deep pockets and deeper arrogance, would drag this out with every trick in their arsenal: delays, misdirection, anything to bury the truth. But Lisa thrived on challenges like these. She scribbled a note in the margin of her document, her pen pressing harder as she thought of the question they'd force Horizon to answer. How many misunderstandings could an airline claim before the world saw them for what they were? The legal battle erupted into motion the day Lisa filed the formal complaint, a meticulously crafted document accusing Horizon Airlines of racial discrimination and emotional distress. Amara had stood beside her in the courthouse, her expression a mix of exhaustion and unyielding resolve, as reporters swarmed like moths to a flame. By morning, headlines screamed across every major outlet: "Amara Johnson takes on Horizon Airlines in bold discrimination suit." The complaint wasn't a simple grab for cash, it was a clarion call for justice, a demand that Horizon dismantle its flimsy excuses and rebuild its entire system from the ground up. Amara wanted training programs torn apart and rewritten, anti-discrimination policies etched in stone, and accountability carved into the airline's core. The world took notice, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Horizon's response came fast, a polished counterattack from their legal machine. Their chief operating officer, Harrison Brooks, stepped into the spotlight with a statement so carefully worded, it might as well have been sculpted from marble. Standing behind a podium in a tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the camera lights, he spoke of passenger safety and inclusivity with the practiced ease of a man who'd dodged scrutiny before. The incident, he insisted, was a regrettable mix-up, a one-off stumble with no trace of bias. His voice was smooth, his demeanor unshaken, but the public saw through the veneer. Advocacy groups wasted no time, their voices rising in a chorus of defiance as they marched outside Horizon's gleaming corporate headquarters. Protesters hoisted signs: "High dignity for all passengers," and "Accountability now," their chants echoing off glass towers as petitions circled online, gathering signatures like wildfire. Social media became a battleground of its own, a sprawling canvas where passengers spilled their own stories of mistreatment at Horizon's hands. A young mother tweeted about being singled out for random searches 3 flights in a row, her toddler clinging to her leg as security rifled through her bags. A businessman posted a shaky video of a flight attendant eyeing him suspiciously for daring to adjust his seat. Each story chipped away at Horizon's facade, revealing a pattern too glaring to ignore. Amara scrolled through the flood of posts late into the night, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and solidarity. She hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined that her stand would ignite a movement, but now she was its reluctant centerpiece, a beacon for those who'd been silenced too long. The elderly man's letter stayed with her, a quiet anchor amid the storm. She could picture him, stooped shoulders, hands gnarled from years of labor, eyes carrying the weight of every sit-along glance he'd endured on planes and buses and trains. His words fueled her, hardening her resolve into something unbreakable. She wasn't just suing an airline. She was challenging a world that had normalized suspicion as instinct. When Lisa's team unearthed Horizon's training manual's vague, subjective guidelines about situational awareness that left room for prejudice, to fester, Amara's anger flared anew. A whistleblower, a former flight attendant named Carla, with tired eyes and a voice thick with regret, came forward with a recording that sent chills down her spine. "They tell us to trust our instincts," Carla said, her words crackling through the static. "But those instincts, they're just biases we've been trained to hide. The system doesn't fix it, it feeds it." As the case swelled, Amara found herself thrust into a blinding spotlight. Interview requests poured in from every corner, morning shows, podcasts, late-night panels, but she chose her platforms with care, opting for spaces where she could steer the conversation beyond her own story. On a national talk show, the studio lights hot against her skin, she sat tall and spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. "This isn't just about me or Horizon Airlines," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "This is about an industry hell, a society that's let bias seep into every crack and crevice. Change doesn't come from shrugging off these mistakes. It comes when we hold people accountable, when we stop letting power dodge the consequences." The clip exploded online, shared and reshared until her words became a rallying cry. She was no longer just Amara Johnson. She was a voice for justice, a mirror reflecting a truth too long ignored. But with that visibility came a backlash as fierce as it was predictable. Horizon's lawyers turned their gaze on her past, clawing through old interviews and public statements like vultures scavenging for scraps. They questioned her colleagues, twisted her words, hunted for any flaw they could wield to smear her name. Lisa had warned her about this over coffee one gray morning, her tone sharp with concern. "They'll try to make you look irrational, Amara, like you're chasing fame or blowing this out of proportion." Amara had met her friend's eyes with a faint, steely smile. "Let them dig," she'd said, stirring her mug slowly. "I've lived my truth out loud. They won't find a single lie to twist." Still, the pressure gnawed at her, the endless motions and delays from Horizon's legal team wearing her patience thin. She'd catch herself staring out her window at night, the city lights blurring as exhaustion crept in, but surrender was never an option. Horizon's PR machine whirred into overdrive, desperate to shift the narrative. They paraded out glossy ads about diversity initiatives and charitable donations, their executives beaming in photo ops with community leaders. But the public wasn't buying it. Protesters kept their vigil at airports and Horizon's offices, their voices growing louder, their signs more pointed. At a rally in Atlanta, Amara stood among them, the humid air thick with sweat and determination. She listened as a teenage girl shared how she'd been followed through a terminal for wearing a hoodie, her voice breaking with humiliation. When Amara took the stage, a rickety platform beneath her feet, she gripped the microphone and spoke from her core. "This isn't about tearing anyone down," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "It's about building a world where no one's judged for their skin, their clothes, their existence. Dignity shouldn't be a privilege, it should be the damn baseline." The cheers roared around her, a tidal wave of energy that lifted her tired spirit. Inside Horizon's boardroom, the mood was far less triumphant. Harrison Brooks sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, his usual polish fraying at the edges. His tie was loosened, his jaw tight as he faced a circle of grim-faced directors. "We can't keep pretending this'll blow over," one board member snapped, a weary man with glasses perched low on his nose. "Our stock's tanking. Customers are jumping ship, our reputation's in the gutter." Harrison rubbed his temples, his voice clipped. "And what's your big fix? An apology, a payout, rewriting every policy we've got? That's millions down the drain." The board member leaned forward, unflinching. "Doing nothing costs more, Harrison. This isn't fading, it's growing. We've got to act before we're buried." The room crackled with tension, the weight of their empire teetering on the edge. Back at Lisa's office, Amara stepped into a packed conference room. Her silver suitcase a quiet shadow at her side. The lines on her face told of sleepless nights, but her eyes burned with purpose. Lisa's team sprawled around a cluttered table, laptops glowing with timelines and testimonies. A whiteboard mapping the case in chaotic detail: flight crew emails, training docs, passenger stories. Lisa stood tall at the front, her presence commanding, her eyes angling for a settlement. She announced, her voice cutting through the hum, "But it's a hush deal money to make this vanish. Amara's not here for that." Amara nodded, her fingers brushing the suitcase's handle. "If they think this ends with a check, they're wrong. This is bigger than meets about every person they've targeted with their so-called protocols. We've got to prove this isn't one flight. It's a system rotten to the core." Lisa's gaze softened, but her tone stayed firm. "We're with you. But brace yourself, they are coming for your past harder than ever." The fight stretched on, a grueling marathon of courtroom chess and public warfare. Horizon's latest statement, a tepid promise to review training, landed like a damp rag, sparking fresh outrage. Behind closed doors, Harrison called yet another crisis meeting, his frustration boiling over as he paced the room. "The lawyers are stalling, but the public's eating us alive," he growled. "Every day this drags on, we bleed more." Outside, the world kept turning, and Amara kept pushing her voice, her story, her unshakable demand for justice, reshaping the battle into something far greater than she'd ever dreamed. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the cost of power unchecked, the price of silence, and the fierce, fragile hope that truth could still prevail. In the dimly lit boardroom of Horizon Airlines, tension hung thick in the air, a storm brewing among the polished mahogany and leather chairs. A senior board member, his brow furrowed with years of hard-earned experience, leaned forward, his voice cutting through the murmur of uncertainty like a blade. "We've been playing defense for far too long," he said, his tone heavy with frustration. "This isn't just about survival anymore, it's about showing the world we mean business. When it comes to fixing our mess, if we don't act decisively, this lawsuit will drag us under, and we'll have no one to blame but ourselves." His words landed like a thunderclap, stirring unease in the hearts of everyone present. Across the table, Harrison, a younger executive with a sharp mind and a cautious streak, shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped nervously against the edge of his notepad as he wrestled with the weight of the moment. "And what exactly are you proposing?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and dread. "Do we overhaul our training programs from the ground up? Fire the entire flight crew to make an example? Issue a public apology that could backfire spectacularly? Every path forward is a minefield. None of them are safe." His eyes darted around the room, searching for reassurance that never came. The senior board member's gaze hardened, unwavering. "Doing nothing is the real minefield," he shot back, his voice rising with conviction. "The risks of inaction outweigh anything we might face by taking a stand. We're not just fighting a lawsuit here, we're fighting for our credibility, our future." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, each executive grappling with their own fears and calculations. Beneath the heated debate, one truth loomed large: Horizon's leadership was backed into a corner, their options dwindling with every passing second. Meanwhile, far from the sterile glow of the boardroom, Amara Johnson and her legal team were forging ahead with unrelenting determination. In a cluttered office lined with bookshelves and coffee-stained files, Lisa Caldwell, Amara's fierce and brilliant attorney, pored over stacks of documents with a quiet intensity. She had rallied an army of support civil rights organizations, had thrown their weight behind the case, bringing not just resources, but a deep well of expertise to the fight. Together, they were preparing for the depositions, a crucible where truth would be tested under oath. Among the key witnesses was Sarah Dixon, the flight attendant whose single decision had set this firestorm in motion. For Amara and Lisa, her testimony was the linchpin that could unravel Horizon's fragile defense. The deposition room was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, a sterile, windowless space where the air felt heavy with anticipation. Amara sat beside Lisa at a long conference table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her silver suitcase resting on the floor beside her like a silent sentinel. Across from them, Sarah Dixon perched stiffly in the witness chair, her posture rigid, her face a mask of unease. Horizon's lawyers flanked her like guards, their expressions unreadable, but their presence imposing. Lisa's voice broke the silence, calm yet piercing as she leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Dixon, can you walk us through why you felt compelled to report Ms. Johnson's suitcase to the cockpit that day?" Sarah's eyes flickered to her attorney, a fleeting plea for guidance, before she answered. I thought it was strange," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She kept it so close to her, almost like she was guarding it. "And she seemed nervous at least. That's how it looked to me." Her words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, as if she herself wasn't entirely convinced. Lisa's gaze sharpened, though her tone remained steady, deliberate. "Did Ms. Johnson ever say or do anything at all had explicitly suggested she posed a threat to the safety of that flight?" She paused, letting the question settle like dust in the stillness. Sarah shifted in her seat, her discomfort palpable. "No," she admitted at last, her voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "Not explicitly, no." Lisa pressed on, her words measured but unrelenting. "So your decision, one that turned a routine flight into a nightmare for my client, was based solely on how she looked to you, on the way she held her luggage. Is that right?" Sarah squirmed, her hands twisting in her lap. "I wouldn't say it like that," she mumbled. "I was just following my instincts." "Instincts," Lisa echoed, her voice rising just enough to underscore the absurdity. "Instincts that led to a woman who's received the Presidential Medal of Freedom being treated like a criminal. That's what your instincts accomplished, Ms. Dixon, is that correct?" Horizon's lawyer leapt to object, his voice sharp and defensive, but the damage was already done. Sarah's testimony, though carefully rehearsed, laid bare the flimsy foundation of Horizon's case. It wasn't safety driving her actions, it was bias, pure and simple, masquerading as caution. Amara watched in silence, her chest tight with a mix of vindication and lingering pain. Outside the courtroom, the case was gathering momentum like a tidal wave. Lawmakers in Washington took notice, their calls for congressional hearings on racial profiling in the airline industry growing louder by the day. When they invited Amara to testify, she didn't hesitate for a moment. The hearing took place in a grand chamber on Capitol Hill, its high ceilings and marble walls amplifying the gravity of the occasion. The room was packed. Reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the long table where Amara sat. Her silver suitcase gleamed under the harsh lights, a quiet but powerful symbol of everything she'd endured. As she began to speak, her voice was steady, threaded with a passion that came from deep within. "This isn't about one airline or one flight," she said, her gaze sweeping across the lawmakers before her. "It's about a culture that lets prejudice run wild, that dresses up discrimination as vigilance, and leaves people like me, people of color, feeling like intruders in places where we have every right to be. We deserve better than this. We deserve justice." Her words struck a chord, igniting applause that rolled through the chamber like thunder. Cameras captured every second, and soon snippets of her speech were racing across the internet, resonating with countless others who'd felt the sting of similar injustices. For Amara, it was a moment of clarity. This fight was bigger than her, and the tide was finally turning. Back at Horizon, the pressure was crushing. Behind closed doors, the company's legal team huddled with Lisa's crew, scrambling to negotiate a way out of the spiraling crisis. In a sleek meeting room overlooking the city skyline, Lisa sat across from Horizon's attorneys, her posture unyielding. "We're not here for a paycheck," she told them, her voice firm and resolute. "What we want is real change, a mandatory anti-bias training, stricter oversight, and a public promise to hold yourselves accountable. Anything less, and we'll see you in court." The Horizon lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing the world was watching, waiting for their next move. As the negotiations dragged on, Amara felt a shift within herself. Each step forward lightened the burden she'd carried since that fateful flight. The silver suitcase, once a source of humiliation, had transformed in her hands. It wasn't just a container for her medal anymore, it was a beacon of resilience, a testament to the power of standing tall against wrongdoing. What began as a personal battle had blossomed into a national reckoning, a chance to dismantle the systems that had shielded injustice for too long. The legal fight pressed into the discovery phase, where evidence became the battlefield. Lisa's team unearthed a treasure trove of internal Horizon document string manuals, employee emails, and a chilling memo sent just weeks before Amara's flight. Sitting in her office, surrounded by the soft hum of a city winding down for the night, Lisa read the memo aloud to Amara. "Trust your instincts," she recited, her voice flat but dripping with disdain. "Notify the cockpit immediately if anything feels off." She looked up, meeting Amara's eyes. "That's it, no guidelines, no protections against bias. Just a blank check to act on whatever assumptions they feel like making." Amara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Unusual behavior," she muttered. "Funny how that always seems to mean people like me, people who don't fit their perfect little picture of who belongs in first class." Her fingers traced the edge of her suitcase, a habit she'd picked up in moments of quiet fury. Lisa set the memo down, a spark of triumph in her eyes. "This is gold, Amara. It proves their policies aren't about safety, they're about letting prejudice call the shots. This is where we'll break them." At the same time, Horizon's legal team was deposing witnesses from the flight, hoping to shore up their crumbling narrative. Most passengers backed Amara's account, their memories vivid with the crew's unwarranted fixation on her. One woman, Linda Harrington, stood out, an older passenger with a gentle demeanor and a sharp memory. She sat in the deposition room, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "I kept thinking, why are they bothering her?" Linda said, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't doing anything wrong, just sitting there, polite as could be, with that suitcase of hers. But the way they kept staring at her, hovering, it didn't feel right. Not one bit. Horizon's lawyers tried to poke holes in her story, suggesting she couldn't possibly grasp the crew's concerns. But Lisa dismantled their arguments with surgical precision, exposing the absence of any real evidence to justify their actions. While the courtroom drama unfolded, Horizon launched a desperate PR offensive. Slick ads flooded television screens and social media feeds, showcasing a rainbow of smiling employees and touting the company's commitment to diversity. They unveiled a partnership with a nonprofit, promising scholarships for underrepresented groups in aviation. The public's response was a mixed bag. Some saw it as a step forward, others as a hollow gesture to dodge accountability. Advocacy groups weren't fooled, branding the efforts as performative nonsense meant to deflect from the lawsuit's core issues. Amara refused to let the noise pull her off course. At a town hall in Atlanta, she stood shoulder to shoulder with community leaders and activists, their stories echoing hers in haunting ways. The room buzzed with energy as she took the mic, her voice ringing out with quiet strength. "This fight isn't just mine," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's about making sure no one else has to feel what I felt: small, targeted, invisible. It's about tearing down a system that decides our worth based on how we look, where we come from. And we're not stopping until it's done." The audience roared, their cheers a tidal wave of solidarity that washed over her, renewing her resolve. This wasn't just her burden anymore, it belonged to everyone who'd ever been made to feel less than human. Back at Horizon's headquarters, the cracks were showing. In a late-night board meeting, CEO Andrew Calloway sat at the head of the table, his face etched with exhaustion. The room was a powder keg. Senior executives clashed, their voices sharp with desperation. "We're hemorrhaging customers and trust," one board member snapped, slamming a report onto the table. "Bookings are down 15%. Protests are growing. We need a real response, not more half measures." Andrew leaned back, rubbing his temples. "What more can we do?" he asked, his voice frayed. "We've rolled out training, partnered with a non-profit. What's left short of admitting we're wrong?" Another executive jumped in, her tone urgent. "We can't keep stalling. Amara Johnson isn't backing down, and neither are her allies. If we don't offer something substantial soon, we'll lose everything." Silence fell, thick and suffocating, as the reality sank in. Horizon was teetering on the edge, and the lessons of justice and the perils of unchecked power were closing in fast. Through it all, Amara pressed forward, her every move a defiance of the forces that had tried to break her. The courtroom and the court of public opinion became twin arenas where truth battled denial, where the consequences of abuse laid bare the rot within. Her silver suitcase, once a source of shame, now shone as a symbol of something greater, a call for accountability, a demand for change, and a reminder that power, when wielded without care, could topple even the mightiest. The air inside the sleek, modern conference room felt heavy, almost suffocating. As Amara Johnson sat at the polished table, her hands folded calmly in her lap, she could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing within her. Today was her deposition, a pivotal moment in the legal battle against Horizon Airlines, and she knew the weight of every word she was about to speak. Across from her sat Michael Clean, Horizon's lead attorney, a man whose reputation preceded him. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his piercing blue eyes studied her with a calculated intensity. He adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture that betrayed his readiness to dissect her every statement, and began with a tone so smooth it almost masked the sharpness beneath it. "Miss Johnson, thank you for joining us today," he said, his voice steady yet probing, like a fisherman casting a line into murky waters. "Let's begin with the events on the flight. Would you agree that the crew's actions were motivated by a genuine concern for passenger safety?" Amara's heart thudded in her chest, but her face remained a mask of resolve. She met his gaze unflinchingly, her dark brown eyes burning with a quiet fire. "No, I wouldn't," she replied, her voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the sterile air like a blade. Their actions weren't about safety. They were rooted in assumptions, bossless ones. At no point did I give them any reason to see me as a threat. Her mind flashed back to that day on the plane, the way the flight attendants' eyes had lingered on her silver suitcase, the curt tone in their voices as they demanded she step aside, the humiliation that had burned in her chest as other passengers stared. It wasn't about what she'd done, it was about who they assumed she was. Clean leaned forward slightly, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "So, you're suggesting their actions were driven by bias?" he pressed, his words dripping with skepticism, as if daring her to falter. Amara straightened in her chair, her spine rigid with determination. "I'm not suggesting Edie know it," she shot back, her tone firm yet laced with a raw edge of frustration. "The way they singled me out, the way they fixated on my Suitcase wasn't random. It was personal. It was about the color of my skin, the assumptions they carried in their heads. I felt it in every glance, every word." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of reliving that moment, the injustice of it all surging through her like a tide she could barely contain. Clean shifted tactics, his demeanor softening as he tried to paint the crew's actions as a reasonable precaution. "Surely you can understand that in today's climate, crews are trained to err on the side of caution," he said, his hands gesturing broadly as if appealing to some universal truth. But Amara wasn't swayed. She leaned forward now, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her voice rising with a clarity that filled the room. "Caution based on evidence is one thing. What they did was based on prejudice. I was calm, compliant, and cooperative. They had no grounds, no evidence to treat me like I was dangerous. And yet they did. That's not caution. That's abuse of power." Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable, a testament to her strength and the truth she carried. Outside the glass-walled room, Lisa Caldwell stood with her arms crossed, her breath fogging faintly against the window as she watched. Her heart swelled with a quiet, fierce pride. Amara wasn't just holding her own, she was turning the deposition into a battlefield, where truth was her weapon. Lisa, with her neatly pressed blazer and tired eyes from sleepless nights of preparation, had seen plenty of clients crumble under pressure. But Amara was different. Her composure, her eloquent sight was as if she'd taken the weight of her experience and forged it into something unbreakable. As the session drew to a close, Amara rose from her chair, her head held high, her steps deliberate as she exited the room. Lisa hurried to catch up with her in the hallway, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the tiled floor. "You were incredible in there," Lisa said, her voice soft but brimming with admiration. a rare smile breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. Amara nodded, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "Thanks, but this is just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead." Her eyes flickered with determination, a silent vow that this fight for justice, for change, was far from over. Weeks later, the scene shifted to a grander stage, a congressional hearing room packed with restless energy. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks, legal teams whispering among themselves, and ordinary citizens who'd come to witness history unfold. At the center of it all stood Amara, her silver suitcase resting on the table beside her like a silent witness to her story. The room buzzed with anticipation as the chairperson, a stern woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense air, called her name. Amara adjusted the microphone with steady hands, her heart pounding, but her spirit unshaken. She took a deep breath, the faint scent of polished wood and stale coffee filling her lungs, and began to speak. "Thank you for giving me this chance to share my story," she said, her voice resonating through the cavernous space, steady yet carrying the weight of countless sleepless nights. "But this isn't just about me. It's about the thousands of others who've been judged, targeted, and humiliated not because of what they did, but because of who someone assumed them to be." Her words flowed like a river, calm yet forceful. As she recounted the events of that fateful flight, she described the way the crew's eyes had darted to her suitcase, the way their voices had hardened with suspicion, the way her dignity had been stripped away in front of a plane full of strangers. There was no theatrical flair in her delivery, just raw, unfiltered truth. "Bias doesn't come with a neon sign," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, locking eyes with lawmakers and spectators alike. "It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It hides behind vague words like suspicion or instinct, and if we let it go unchallenged, it will keep eating away at trust, at dignity, one person at a time." The room fell silent, her words settling over the crowd like a heavy fog, forcing everyone to confront the reality she'd laid bare. The hearing stretched on for hours, the air growing thick with tension as lawmakers turned their attention to Horizon Airlines representatives. Harrison Brooks, the company's coup, sat stiffly in his chair, his tailored suit doing little to mask the unease etched into his face. His salt and pepper hair glistened with sweat under the harsh lights, as he fielded questions with a strained politeness. "Our crew acted with the best intentions," he insisted, his voice tight, almost pleading. "Their priority was the safety of everyone on board. While we regret Miss Johnson's discomfort, their actions aligned with our policies." But his words felt hollow, and the room sensed it. A lawmaker, her glasses perched low on her nose, leaned forward, her voice cutting through his explanation like a whip. "Mr. Brooks, are you saying your policies justify targeting passengers without evidence? Because that's what this sounds like," Harrison faltered, his hands fidgeting with a pen on the table. "That's not what I meant," he stammered. "Our guidelines prioritize safety, but they don't prioritize fairness, do they?" The lawmaker interrupted, her tone unrelenting. "Your policies enabled this. What are you doing to fix it?" Harrison's response was a tangle of vague promises and deflections, each word met with growing skepticism from the room. Outside, the media pounced, headlines screaming about Horizon's failure to own up to its flaws, their lack of accountability fueling the fire of public outrage. Back in her cramped office, Lisa Caldwell burned the midnight oil, her desk buried under stacks of legal briefs and empty coffee cups. She was a whirlwind of focus, rallying civil rights groups and lining up expert witness historians and psychologists who could trace the ugly thread of racial profiling through decades of airline history. These weren't just voices in the background, they were pillars of the case. People like Dr. Evelyn Carter, a soft-spoken professor whose gentle demeanor belied her fierce intellect. She testified about patterns of discrimination, her words weaving a tapestry of data and human stories that showed Amra's ordeal was no anomaly. It was a symptom of a diseased system. Then came the bombshell. A second whistleblower emerged from Horizon's ranks. Daniel Ruiz, a weary man with nervous hands and a conscience that wouldn't let him stay silent, had worked in the corporate office for years. He brought with him a stack of internal emails, each one a dagger to the company's defense. One email stood out: a manager's curt dismissal of a junior employee's concerns about profiling. Better safe than sorry. Lisa's eyes gleamed with a mix of triumph and fury as she handed the printout to Amara. During a late-night strategy session, "This is it," she said, her voice low but electric. "This proves their culture doesn't just allow BS, it thrives on it." Amara stared at the words, her jaw tightening as a wave of anger and sorrow washed over her. "How many people have suffered because of this?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the cold, impersonal text. Lisa rested a hand on her shoulder, her touch firm yet comforting. "We're going to stop it, Amara. This changes everything." Inside Horizon's gleaming headquarters, the fallout was palpable. The boardroom, with its panoramic views of the city skyline, became a pressure cooker of clashing egos. Andrew Calloway, the CEO, sat at the head of the table. His broad shoulders slumped as he listened to the escalating debate. One board member, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue, pounded her fist on the table. "We've lost the public's trust already," she snapped. "If we don't settle, we'll lose everything: our reputation, our market share, all of it." Across from her, a grizzled older man with a permanent scowl shot back. "A settlement will bankrupt us and invite every disgruntled passenger to sue. We fight this." Andrew rubbed his temples, his mind spinning. "If we keep fighting, we look like we're dodging responsibility," he muttered. "If we settle, we look guilty. There's no winning here." The room crackled with tension, each voice a testament to the chaos Amara's case had unleashed. Meanwhile, beyond the corporate walls, a movement swelled. Activists launched a nationwide campaign, Dignity in the Skies, urging passengers to pin small badges to their shirts during flights, a quiet but powerful statement. The pins glinted under airport lights as travelers from coast to coast joined in, their photos flooding social media, amplified by voices from Hollywood to local coffee shops. At the heart of it all was Amara, her presence steady and unwavering. In Chicago, she stood before a crowd of over 2,000, the wind tugging at her coat as she spoke from a makeshift stage. "This isn't about tearing down an airline," she said, her voice soft yet piercing, carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "It's about building something better, a world where safety doesn't come at the cost of fairness, where dignity isn't a privilege but a right." The applause that followed was deafening, a roar of hope and defiance that echoed through the city. Back in Lisa's office, the trial loomed like a storm on the horizon. The team worked through sleepless nights, their eyes bleary but their spirits unbroken. Amara moved among them, her quiet strength a beacon in the chaos. She reviewed documents, offered insights, and kept the fire of their mission burning bright. For Horizon, the trial was a desperate bid to salvage their crumbling image. For Amara, it was more a chance to rewrite the rules of justice, to ensure that power unchecked would face consequences, and to prove that one voice, fueled by truth, could shake a system to its core. The road stretching before them shimmered with uncertainty, a winding path where every step felt heavy with meaning. Yet one truth shone brighter than the rest: the battle was nowhere near its end. For those who'd ever been pushed to the edges, made to feel like strangers in spaces they had every right to claim, this fight carried a weight that went beyond a single courtroom. It was a cry against a world that too often judged worth by appearances, a stand against systems that cloaked their flaws in polished excuses. In the tense days before the trial, Horizon Airlines unleashed a storm of defiance. Their counteroffensive roared to life with a ferocity that seemed almost desperate, as if they could drown out the swelling tide of Amar Johnson's case with sheer noise. Their public relations machine churned relentlessly, flooding television screens and radio waves with glossy ads that painted the airline as a beacon of inclusion. Employees from every corner of the globe flashed across the screen, their smiles wide and rehearsed, each one sharing heartfelt tales of how Horizon embraced diversity. It was a dazzling show, a tapestry of voices meant to dazzle and disarm. Meanwhile, their legal team scrambled behind closed doors, filing motion after motion to stall the trial. They pleaded for more time, claiming the evidence they needed was just out of reach, a flimsy shield against the inevitable. But Amara Johnson and her attorney, Lisa Caldwell, stood like unyielding oaks against the gale. Their resolve didn't waver, not for a moment. The court saw through Horizon's tactics, brushing aside most of their motions with a swiftness that left the airline reeling. The path to trial yawned open, clear and unblocked. Yet the war raged on beyond the courthouse steps. Horizon's lawyers slithered into the shadows, whispering to hand-picked reporters, planting seeds of doubt about Amara's character. Soon, articles sprouted like weeds, their words sharp and insinuating. Was she a crusader for justice, they asked, or a fame-hungry opportunist cloaking her ambition in noble causes? One afternoon, Lisa sat in her cluttered office, the late sunlight spilling across her desk, and read one such piece aloud. Her voice simmered with contempt as the words dripped from her lips. Sources close to the case suggest Johnson has seized this moment to thrust herself into the national spotlight, perhaps dreaming of a future far beyond these legal proceedings. She let the paper fall with a soft thud, her eyes narrowing. "This is textbook," she muttered. "They can't bury the truth, so they're coming for your name." Across the desk, Amara sat with a stillness that belied the fire within her. Her face was calm, her dark eyes steady. But beneath that quiet exterior burned a resolve forged in countless small battles. "Let them swing," she said, her voice low but firm. "The truth's on our side, Lisa. The people see it." Horizons flailing because they're losing their grip on the story, on everything. Lisa tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're right," she replied, "but we can't let it slide. They'll drag this into the trial. Try to paint you as some schemer or agitator. We'll hit back with what matters, the facts, and who you really are." While Horizon's team waded deeper into the mire, trying to cloud the waters with half-truths, Amara's supporters rallied with a fervor that shook the ground beneath them. Civil rights groups, lawmakers with weathered faces and sharp tongues, and activists who'd marched through worse storms than Thisty all stepped into the fray. Press conferences erupted in city after city, their voices rising like a chorus, while statements of solidarity poured in from every direction. The evidence was a battering ram, leaked emails from Horizon's own ranks and the raw, unfiltered words of whistleblowers who'd seen the rot from the inside. It was undeniable now, a culture that didn't just turn a blind eye to racial profiling but fed it, nurtured it, let it fester. One email, in particular, became a lightning rod, written by a mid-level manager with a tone so casual it chilled the blood. It urged flight crews to keep an extra sharp eye on passengers whose behavior or appearance feels inconsistent with first-class norms. Lisa pored over the document late one night, her coffee gone cold, her voice rising in disbelief as she read it aloud to herself. First-class norms? They might as well have scribbled, "Watch out for anyone who doesn't fit the mold." Amara, sitting nearby with her arms crossed, felt a pang deep in her chest, not just anger, but a quiet ache. "It's not only about the words," she said, her gaze distant. "It's what they mean. A whole system that looks at someone like me and sees an outsider, not a person. That's the beast we're here to tear down." Horizon's lawyers clawed to keep that email buried, arguing it was a stray thread, a misunderstanding yanked out of context. But the judge's gavel fell like thunder, ruling it admissible. And Lisa's team seized it like a prize, weaving it into the heart of their case. The trial's first day crackled with energy. The courtroom hummed, a hive of whispers and rustling papers as reporters crammed into the gallery, their pens poised like arrows. Outside, protesters milled in the crisp morning air, their signs thrust high equality in the skies. "Bias has no place or other chance," a steady drumbeat against the stone walls. At the plaintiff's table, Amara sat with her silver suitcase beside her, its sleek surface catching the light. It wasn't just luggage anymore. It was a talisman, a mute witness to the day she'd been stripped of her dignity for no reason. But the color of her skin. Horizon's lead attorney, Michael Clean, rose with a practiced calm, his gray suit impeccable, his voice smooth as polished stone. "This case," he began, "boils down to safety. Horizon Airlines crew acted not out of prejudice, but out of genuine effort to shield every soul on that plane. We're sorry, Ms." Johnson felt uneasy, but discomfort isn't proof of wrongdoing or ill will. Lisa countered with a fire that cut through his silk-spun words. Standing tall, her presence commanding, she faced the jury. "This isn't about safety, it's about bias. Plain and simple. Horizon's own rules let prejudice steer the ship. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It's a pattern, a sickness they've ignored for years. Weeks unfurled, each day a slow grind of testimony and tension. Horizon called Sarah Dixon, the flight attendant who'd flagged Amara, to the stand. She stepped forward in her crisp uniform, her blonde hair pulled tight, but her hands betrayed her fidgeting, twisting together as if trying to hold her nerves in place. Under Clean's gentle prodding, she spoke. "Miss Johnson seemed off," she said, her voice thin. She kept her suitcase close, wouldn't engage. I couldn't put my finger on it. But something felt wrong. "We're trained to report anything odd." Clean leaned in. "Did you think she was a clear danger?" Sarah faltered, her eyes darting. "No," she admitted, softer now. "It was just a hunch." When Lisa took her turn, her questions were a surgeon's scalpel. Precise and unsparing. "Ms. Dixon, you acted on a hunch. Did your training ever teach you how to spot bias in yourself? How to question those instincts?" Sarah's cheeks flushed, her silence heavy. "Not exactly." She mumbled. "We're told to trust our gut." Lisa pressed on, her voice steady but piercing. "And that gut told you to report a woman who'd done nothing but guard her own property." Sarah squirmed, her yes barely audible, a confession that hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the trial rippled through the world. Headlines screamed daily updates, pundits sparred over every twist, and the public's faith in Horizon's safety excuse crumbled. As more travelers shared their own tales of profiling aloft, then came Amara's moment. She took the stand with a quiet grace, her spine straight, her voice a clear bell cutting through the room's murmur. She recounted the blithe sit-along glances, the curt demands, the weight of being seen as a threat for no reason at all. "I wasn't a passenger that day," she said, her words steady but laced with an 8 years in the making. "I was a puzzle they couldn't solve, a risk they had to contain, not because of what I did, but because of who they assumed I was. That doesn't just wound one person, it chips away at everyone's trust, everyone's worth." Clean tried to shake her, his tone sly. "Ms. Johnson, hasn't this case boosted your name, your face in the news?" She met his eyes unflinching. "If my voice stops this from happening again, I'll shout from every rooftop. This isn't about me, it's about what's right." As the trial drew to its close, it was more than a lawsuit. It was a mirror held up to an industry, a spark igniting questions long ignored. Horizon's leaders, cornered by the mounting pressure, whispered about settlements. But for Amara, victory wasn't a check, it was change, real and lasting. The final days felt like a storm breaking. The courtroom swelled with onlookers, the air thick with expectation. Protesters' voices seeped through the walls, a tide of hope and fury. Amara sat with her suitcase, its silver gleam a quiet anchor. Clean's closing was a plea for mercy. "This is about safety versus perception. Our crew did their best in a split-second world. Punish Horizon, and you'll paralyze every airline, make them fear their own shadows." Lisa rose last, her words a blade honed by truth. "This is about justice. Horizon abused its power, let bias run wild, and thought no one would care. They were wrong. The consequences of that arrogance demand accountability, 'cause no one should board a plane and leave their dignity behind." The lesson lingered, sharp and undeniable. Power unchecked breeds injustice, and justice delayed is a wound that festers. For Amara, for Sarah, for every voice in that room, the fight was a reminder consequence matter, and the fall of the mighty begins with the courage to stand. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity as Lisa adjusted the lapels of her blazer, her fingers lingering on the fabric for a moment as if drawing strength from its crisp edges. She took a deep breath, her heart steady, but her mind racing with the weight of what she was about to say. Stepping forward toward the jury, her heels clicked sharply against the polished wooden floor, each step a declaration of purpose. "Horizon Airlines would have you believe this is a story about good intentions," she began, her voice smooth yet firm, carrying a resolve that seemed to anchor the room. "They'll paint it as a simple misunderstanding, a momentary lapse rooted in their commitment to safety. But let me be clear, this isn't about intentions. It's about what they did, the choices they made, and the consequences that followed. It's about a system that let bias masquerade as protocol, and the human cost of that failure. Her gaze shifted briefly to the silver suitcase resting near the table, its sleek surface catching the light like a silent witness. She gestured toward it with a sweep of her hand, her movements deliberate. This suitcase? It was never a bomb, never a weapon, never a threat. And Amar Johnson, the woman who carried it, was no danger to anyone. What she was, Isis, a brilliant, accomplished black woman who dared to exist in a space where someone decided she didn't belong. First class wasn't just a seat to them, it was a boundary, a line she crossed by simply being herself. And for that audacity, they stripped her of her dignity, humiliated her in front of strangers, detained her like a criminal, and left her feeling smaller than she'd ever felt before. Lisa's voice grew sharper, her words slicing through the stillness as she stepped closer to the jury, her eyes locking with theirs. This isn't about one flight gone wrong. This is about a system that turns a blind eye to discrimination, dressing it up in policies and gut feelings, a system that's overdue for a reckoning. The jurors watched her intently, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and contemplation. A middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses tilted his head slightly, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with the implications of her words. A younger woman in a red sweater nodded faintly, her lips pressed together in quiet agreement. Lisa felt the shift in the air, the subtle pull of their attention, and it fueled her. A verdict for Amar Johnson isn't just about righting a wrong for one person, she continued, her tone rising with a fervor that seemed to vibrate through the room. It's a signal flare to every airline, every institution, that people deserve more than suspicion and shame. They deserve dignity. They deserve fairness. They deserve respect. She held their gaze for a moment longer, letting the weight of her plea settle, then turned and walked back to her seat, her shoulders squared with purpose. Amar sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She stole a glance at the jury as Lisa sat beside her, searching their expressions for a glimmer of understanding. She saw at their thoughtful squint of the man with the glasses, the faint nod from the woman in Redan. A flicker of hope stirred in her chest, fragile but persistent. The judge's voice broke the silence, steady and authoritative, as he delivered the jury's instructions, his gavel striking the bench with a finality that echoed in her ears. As the jurors filed out to deliberate, the room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken tension. Hours dragged by in the courthouse, each minute stretching into an eternity. Amar paced the hallway outside the courtroom, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet, her mind a storm of doubt and determination. She replayed the incident in her head, the way the flight attendant's eyes had narrowed at her, the curt demand to step aside, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into her wrists as passengers stared. She'd felt so powerless then, so exposed, and the memory clawed at her even now. Lisa stood nearby, leaning against a wall, her arms crossed and her face a mask of calm she didn't entirely feel. She watched Amar with quiet concern, her own thoughts churning. Had she said enough? Had she reached them? Their team lingered too, a small cluster of lawyers and assistants exchanging hushed words, their voices a low hum against the stillness. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom snapped into focus. A hush fell over the space, heavy and expectant, as the four-persona weary man with graying hair and a steady gazeras to his feet. He clutched a single sheet of paper, its edges trembling slightly in his hands, and Amar's heart thudded against her ribs. In the matter of Johnson versus Horizon Airlines, he began, his voice cutting through the silence. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Amar Johnson. The words landed like a thunderclap, sending a wave of emotion crashing through the room. Amar let out a ragged breath, her hands gripping the table's edge so tightly her knuckles paled. Relief flooded her, mingling with a fierce, hard-won pride. Lisa's hand found her shoulder, a warm, grounding touch, and when Amar glanced at her, she saw the lawyer's eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. The foreperson wasn't finished. The jury also awards Miss Johnson compensatory damages for emotional distress, he continued, and punitive damages, intended to push Horizon Airlines toward meaningful change. The numbers didn't matter as much as the Messagethi'd seen the injustice, and they'd acted. It was a rebuke, a demand for accountability, and it reverberated beyond the courtroom's walls. Outside, The crowd erupted. A roar of cheers spilling through the windows as news of the verdict raced through the streets. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing like lightning, their voices clamoring for a soundbite. Amar emerged into the chaos, flanked by Lisa and their team, the cool March air brushing against her face. She stood tall, the silver suitcase in her grip a quiet companion, and faced the microphones. "This verdict isn't just mine," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind around her, each word deliberate and clear. "It's for every person who's been sized up, singled out, or silenced because of their skin, their gender, their roots. It's a step toward holding power to account, but it's only a step. We've got miles to go, and I'm not stopping here. Together, we'll keep fighting for what's right, not just on planes, but in every corner of this world." The crowd cheered again, louder this time, and Amar felt the sound lift her, a tide of collective resolve. In the days that followed, the world took notice. Advocacy groups hailed the decision as a turning point, a crack in the armor of systemic bias. Horizon Airlines, battered by public outrage and legal pressure, scrambled to respond. They rolled out mandatory anti-bias training. Every employee from gate agents to executives sitting through sessions led by civil rights experts. An independent oversight board took shape, its members drawn from advocacy circles. Their mandate to root out prejudice in the airline's operations. Harrison Brooks, the coup, stepped in front of a camera for a televised apology. His tie slightly askew, his face etched with unease. "We fell short," he admitted, his voice tight. "We hurt someone, and we own that. This is our chance to learn, to rebuild trust, to grow." Skeptics scoffed, calling it a PR stunt. But Amar watched with a keen eye, knowing words were cheap without action. Her fight didn't end with Horizon. She threw herself into a bigger battle, working with lawmakers to craft the Passenger Dignity Act, a law to enshrine fairness in air travel. With teeth to enforce it, she sat in congressional hearings, her silver suitcase beside her like a talisman, and shared stories not just hers, but those of others who'd reached out since her case broke open. "This isn't about red tape," she told a room of lawmakers, her voice ringing with quiet power. "It's about people. It's about making sure no one else feels the way I did." The bill passed the House, stumbled in the Senate, but her persistency and the public's clamor carried it through. When the president signed it into law, Amar stood in the East Room, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. She became a voice, a presence speaking at universities, rallies, anywhere people would listen. One night, as she prepared for another event, she opened that silver suitcase. Inside, next to the Presidential Medal of Freedom, were letters, hundreds of them, scribbled notes and typed pages from strangers turned allies. One caught her eye, a shaky scrawl from a girl named Mia, no more than 12. "Because of you. I stood up when my teacher said I couldn't do it," it read. "I won't let them stop me anymore." Amar traced the words with her finger, a smile breaking across her face, her resolve hardening like steel. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. The case of Johnson versus Horizon Airlines lingered in the collective memory, not just for the courtroom win, but for the fire it lit. It taught a raw, unshakable lesson. Justice isn't a gift, it's a demand. Hard fought and fiercely claimed. And when power oversteps, when it crushes instead of lifts, the consequences ripple far beyond the moment. Amar's courage turned a suitcase into a symbol, a beacon for those still finding their voice. And as she stepped onto stages and into battles yet to come, she carried that truth with her. The fight was hers, but it belonged to everyone. Amara Johnson stood in the stillness of her home office, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden streaks across the hardwood floor. Her gaze settled on the silver suitcase, its once shiny surface now softened by scratches and scuffs, each mark a testament to the battles it had endured alongside her. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool metal, and a flood of memories surged through her. Humiliation in a crowded airport terminal, the sting of judgment in a courtroom, and the quiet triumph of standing tall when the world expected her to crumble. That suitcase, once a heavy burden tied to a moment of raw injustice, had transformed into something sacred. It was no longer just an object, it was a beacon of her resilience, a silent witness to her refusal to bow under the weight of systemic bias. Years ago, that same suitcase had been at the heart of her fight against Horizon Airlines, a case that began with a single, piercing act of discrimination. She could still feel the heat rising in her cheeks as airline staff singled her out, their voices sharp with unfounded suspicion, their eyes cold and unyielding. In that moment, her anger had burned, but beneath it simmered a deeper resolve, a stubborn determination to demand fairness, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed or diminished. She knew then that real change demanded more than fleeting outrage. It required unwavering vigilance, a commitment to push forward even when exhaustion gnawed at her spirit. And so she pressed on, step by grueling step, her heart pounding with both fear and purpose. Her attorney, Lisa Caldwell, had been her rock through it all. Lisa wasn't just a lawyer. She was a force of nature, a woman whose reputation as a relentless litigator had preceded her. Before the case, Lisa's name had echoed through legal circles as a fierce advocate, her piercing intellect matched only by her unshakable tenacity. But Johnson v. Horizon Airlines reshaped her, too. As the courtroom battles unfolded, Lisa's fiery arguments and unapologetic pursuit of truth elevated her into something more, a towering figure in civil rights law. Her voice now a clarion call for equity across the nation. The case didn't just change her career, it redefined her purpose. Late nights poring over legal briefs turned into shared dreams with Amara, their bond forged in the crucible of adversity. Together, they launched initiatives to uproot bias from industries far beyond aviation, their collaboration a quiet rebellion against a world too comfortable with its flaws. One crisp evening, as the two women sat in a dimly lit conference room preparing for a panel discussion, Lisa leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes softening. The hum of the city buzzed faintly through the window, a reminder of the lives they were working to touch. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, her voice low but warm, tinged with a mix of pride and weariness. Amara paused, her pen hovering over a page of notes, and a faint smile tugged at her lips. "All the time," she replied, her tone carrying the weight of countless sleepless nights and hard-won victories. "But I can't help thinking about how much farther we still have to go." Lisa nodded, her expression steady but resolute. "True, but what we've built here reaches a foundation, a starting point." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, a quiet acknowledgement that their fight was both a triumph and a promise yet unfulfilled. In the rare moments when the world slowed down, Amara found herself retreating to the sanctuary of her thoughts. She'd sit by the window, the silver suitcase gleaming faintly in the corner, and let her mind wander back to the winding road that had led her here. The journey had been brutal days when doubt clawed at her, nights when the echoes of her mother's voice were all that kept her going. One afternoon, restless and reflective, she knelt before the suitcase and unlatched it with trembling hands. Inside lay the Presidential Medal of Freedom, its edges catching the light, a tangible reward for her courage. But beneath it, tucked into a faded envelope, was something far more precious, a note from her late mother, written in the looping script Amara knew by heart. "Never forget where you come from," it read, "and never stop fighting for where you want to go." She clutched the paper to her chest, her breath catching as tears welled in her eyes. Her mother's words were a lifeline, a tether linking the pain of her past to the hope of her present. They reminded her of the values that had carried her through: grit, integrity, and an unshakable belief in justice. That belief wasn't just personal, it was a fire that spread far beyond her. The story of Johnson v. Horizon Airlines rippled outward, etching itself into the annals of law schools and civil rights seminars. It became a cornerstone, a vivid lesson in accountability and the dismantling of entrenched bias. For Amara, though, it was more than a legal victory, it was the spark that ignited a movement. Each time she spoke, each time she saw a stranger's eyes light up with recognition or resolve, she felt the weight of her purpose deepen, her defiance clinging to that suitcase. Refusing to let her voice be snuffed out had set off a chain reaction, proving that even the smallest stand against injustice could fracture the foundations of power misused. Lisa, too, felt the echoes of their shared victory. Beyond the courtroom, she'd grown into a mentor to young lawyers, her once intimidating presence now tempered with a quiet compassion. She'd sit with them in cluttered offices, sharing stories of the cast, not just the wins, but the moments of despair, the times she doubted they'd prevail. Her assistant, a weary young man named Marcus, often lingered after meetings, his earnest questions revealing a hunger to understand the stakes of their work. "Did you ever think about giving up?" he'd ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa would smile, a rare softness breaking through her steely demeanor. "Every day," she'd admit. But then I'd look at Amara, and I'd remember why we couldn't. For Amara, the road ahead stretched long and uncertain, but she walked it with a steady pace. Each speaking engagement was a chance to breathe life into her story, to weave a tapestry of past struggles and future dreams. On the morning of her next event, she stood before the suitcase one last time, tracing its edges with a reverent touch. It had journeyed with her through shame and triumph, a constant companion in a fight that had reshaped her world. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose in a wave of applause, their cheers thundering through the auditorium. She smiled, her heart swelling, and took a deep breath. Her words flowed not just as a recounting of what had been, but as a call to what could be future, forged together, one voice at a time. Her legacy wasn't hers alone, it belonged to everyone it touched. What began as a solitary stand against Horizon Airlines swelled into a nationwide awakening, a testament to the consequences of unchecked power and the strength of those who dared to challenge it. Amara's courage laid bare the cost of injustice, forcing an industry into societal reckon with its failures. Her story whispered a timeless truth, that resilience could topple giants, that a single act of resistance could birth enduring change. And as her voice carried on, inspiring others to rise, it became clear that the fight for justice was a shared Anya chorus of defiance against a world too long steeped in inequity.